Welcome to all of you. Today we have a very distinguished panel. The panel is going to discuss the book written by our chief guest, Mr. Vagul, called Reflections. But the discussion would be on conversations with the doyens of the banking industry. So we have on the panel first, and I have the privilege to introduce Mr. Sridhar, who is a distinguished Indian banker of about 50 years professional experience in commercial and development banking, with insightful knowledge of financial markets in India and globally. He was chairman and managing director of the Central Bank of India and earlier of the National Housing Bank, then regulator of housing finance companies and fully owned by Reserve Bank of India. He started his career with the State Bank of India and moved later to Export-Import Bank of India, where he rose to be the executive director number 2. He is acknowledged to have brought in transformational leadership in the organizations he headed. He also contributed to public policy formulation in the areas of foreign trade, strategy, housing, overseas investment, and microfinance. Mr. Sridhar was and is on the boards of some leading Indian corporates and overseas companies as a non-executive independent director. He has consulted for international and national organizations in the areas of strategy, organizational development, banking and finance in Sri Lanka, the Caribbean, Saudi Arabia and Southern Africa. He is an alumnus of the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi and Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies, Mumbai. He was awarded the Lord Aldington Banking Research Fellowship for the year 1984 by the Indian Institute of Bankers for undertaking research in UK and France. He is also a fellow of the Indian Institute of Banking and Finance and a fellow of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, UK. Welcome, sir. Welcome to this panel. I have the pleasure now to introduce Mr. Seshasai, a well-known figure who needs no introduction, but I would give before you a small snippet of Mr. Seshasai. A chartered accountant, he started his career with Hindustan Lever in 1971. He joined Ashok Leyland in 1976, rose to become managing director in 1998. He became the executive vice chairman of Ashok Leyland in 2011 and was non-executive vice chairman until July 16. He led Ashok Leyland's transformation into a self-reliant, globally competitive technology leader, seeking growth through globalization and diversification via acquisitions and joint ventures. He was also the chairman of IndusInd Bank from 2007 till 2019. During this period, market cap of the bank increased 53 times. He served on the board of ICICI Limited, ICICI Bank from 1997 to 2003. He served on the board of Infosys and was chairman from June 2015 to 2017. Presently, he serves on the board of Asian Paints Limited. Mr. Seshasai was also the president of the Confederation of Indian Industry during 2006 and 7 and has been an active leader of CII for over 30 years. He was the president of Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers, SIAM, the apex body representing the Indian automobile industry during 2001 to 3. He has also served on a number of government and professional committees. As a member of the Government of India delegations, Mr. Seshasai was an active participant at the Doha Ministerial Round of WTO in 2001 and the Hong Kong Ministerial at Hong Kong in 2005. He was the co-chair of the World Economic Forum Middle East during 2007. He has served as the chairman of the Board of Governors of the NIT Tiruchirappalli and the chairman of the Indian Institute of Information Technology Design and Manufacturing at Kanchipuram. He is presently the chairman and executive committee of Kriya University. He has other accomplishments. He is the chairman of the Executive Council of the Cancer Institute, Chennai, the president of the Schizophrenia Research Foundation, SCARF, and vice president of the Music Academy, Chennai. He has won many honors and recognitions, including the Star of Italian Solidarity Award by the Italian government, Jahangir Gandhi Medal for Industrial and Social Peace by XLRI, Jamshedpur, and the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Put your hands together for Mr. Seshasai. Welcome, sir. And now for the chief guest, Sri Narayan Waghul. Sri Narayan Waghul is the former chairman of ICICI Bank Limited, which is the second largest commercial bank in the country. He is widely recognized in India for his role in pioneering the concept of universal banking model that laid the foundation for a new era in Indian banking. Sri Waghul received his Bachelor's of Commerce honours degree from the University of Madras in 1956, joined the State Bank of India in 1957, and became the director in the National Institute of Bank Management, Mumbai in 1976 before assuming charge as executive director in Central Bank of India in 1978. He became Chairman Bank of India in 1981 and had the distinction of being the youngest ever chairman in a public sector bank. He joined the ICICI Limited as Chairman and CEO in 1985 and continued to head the group until April 2009. During his tenure in ICICI, Sri Waghul created several new institutions, laying the foundation for the development of the universal banking model. He started the first venture capital company in India in 1987, and from a small beginning, this has become the leading venture capital company today. He was also instrumental in setting up ICICI Securities, an investment banking company. When the banking license was thrown open to the non-state players, he set up a commercial bank with which ICICI was to merge subsequently to become the first major universal financial institution catering to the diverse needs of all segments of customers. He also pioneered the concept of credit rating in India by setting up CRISIL. He was the founder chairman of CRISIL for close to 10 years and helped in evolving the best practices of credit rating in the country. Sri Waghul is deeply interested in education, particularly to the underprivileged sections of the society. He is the chairman of Pratham, a leading NGO in this sector. He is associated with several foundations dedicated to the cause of primary education. He is also deeply committed to the cause of science and technology and was responsible for setting up the first science and technology park in the country, known as the ICICI Knowledge Park. He is associated with the Indian Institute of Technology in Jaipur and has been the chairman of IFMR, a business school with an array of research centers engaged in a variety of economic and social research. He is the recipient of numerous awards and honors. He was chosen as the Businessman of the Year by Business India in 1992, Lifetime Achievement Award by the Economic Times in 2006. He was given an award for the contribution to the corporate governance by the Institute of Company Secretaries in 2007. He was given the Lifetime Achievement Award by Ernst & Young and Entrepreneur of the Year Award Program in 2009, the Padma Bhushan by the Government of India in 2009. He was awarded Lifetime Achievement Award by Bombay Management Association in March 2013, and the Lifetime Achievement in Corporate Governance by Asian Center for Corporate Governance and Sustainability in December 2014. It's an honor to have you here with us at CIC, sir. And without further ado, I would request Mr. Seshasai to conduct the further proceedings and moderate the session. Thank you.
Good evening. It's going to be a tough task to moderate this session because moderation would require two extreme opposing views. Given the fact that both of them have had almost similar background in terms of their professional growth, I don't expect that they're going to have opposing views, and look at them, they're not going to be extremists. So it's rather difficult to moderate a session. But I think I'll have to moderate my own enthusiasm for the excellent book that Mr. Waghul has authored. Mr. Waghul says in the preface of that book that his professional career was a result of a serendipitous occurrence of several events which placed him at the right time, at the right place. And that's only because he's very self-effacing. I think what all of us know is that his very sharp intellect, his huge track record of building institutions, and his extraordinary skill of building leaders, which is what has got him to the position that he achieved in his professional career. And I can only recount the glorious terms in which R.K. Talwar, who was a mentor to both of us, had talked about whenever he spoke about Mr. Waghul. I had this privilege of being a part of the ICICI board, both when it was a developing development banking institution as well as when it became a bank. And one always looked forward to attending the board. I must say that I jumped at the invitation that Vagul extended to me to join the ICICI board, because I was just stepping out of the IDBI regional board, and I had taken a decision not to go anywhere near development banking institutions or their boards. And it was also a time when you could not say no when you're nominated to a government body. Actually, at that point of time, I happened to be nominated to another PSB board, and I didn't know about it. So when this came in, I had a good excuse to say that I can't be in another board which was competing, and so promptly accepted the invitation. And we all look forward to the ICICI board, not because that was exciting time because a new private bank was getting created, not because with the vision that Mr. Bagula had, we were filling up all the spaces in the BFSI area, pioneering many institutions that he did. Not because of all of that, only because the post-board lunch, the conversation that we had, and he had this extraordinary skill of narrating anecdotes. So we'd all crowd around the lunch table, and he was a master raconteur. Deadpan expression when he narrated that, only with an explosive end. And therefore, you had this burst of laughter coming out of the lunch table every 10-15 minutes. And that was the high point of the board. I have no hesitation in confessing that. And I'm not surprised that Ajay Piramal also fell to that charm when he was a part of the board of Piramal Enterprises, and he persuaded him to put down all these wonderful anecdotes in a book. I think it was initially started as a biography project, and he wasn't very keen on that, I know that. And when it later on, when he was persuaded to mention his reflections, as he called it, again, he was very reluctant to do it, but I'm sure that all of you, when you read the book, will readily agree that this is one of the very readable, extremely interesting, and a very thought-provoking book as well. It's not merely a hilarious anecdotes, a series of hilarious and sometimes scandalous anecdotes that he has talked about, but it's also deep in the message that it gives. So this was a book that needed to be bought and read. So I would strongly commend all of you, if you have not already read the book, to do so. So I'm not going to take more time at this point of time, so I will request Mr. Bagul to do two things. One is that I want him to say in his own way a couple of anecdotes, because nobody can beat him in that. One definitely is the one dealing with in fact, I'll give him a choice. One of the three leaders that he talks about, one is Morarji Desai, and one anecdote that dealt with Rajiv Gandhi, and the third one that was with Bansilal. You can make a choice of this, but one of these certainly needs to be. Yeah, but I think it's important that they hear you from the way that you put it. And then there is another very interesting anecdote which I definitely want him to say, and that is about a new credit assessment measure that one of the regional managers of ICICI Bank in Delhi invented. And it's an extremely important criteria for credit selection. I want him to talk about that as well. So that's one part of that. And then the second part of it, also that anytime you write a book, I just realized it because I finished writing a book, and I realized that when you write a book, you have some expectations about what you think the readers will get out of that. And then you'll completely be surprised about the totally different things that the readers have taken away from your book. So I want to start with the question, what was your intention, or what did you expect would be the takeaways from your book? And what did you, with all the various comments that have been received by you over the last few weeks, What have you been able to get by way of your takeaways from the reader reaction? The book was released a few weeks ago by the Honorable Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in Mumbai, and since then a lot of people have spoken to me in our circle, so I would like you to touch upon what you think, how it was received.
Thank you, Stage, for your kind words. I'm so happy that this event has got off, because I believe that there is a jinx associated with my release of the book. The book was ready in July last year, and it was supposed to, release function was supposed to be August last year. Mr. Perumal was very keen that it should be released by the Finance Minister. So between them, it took them 6 months to agree on a date. And ultimately, it was agreed on March 18th. And I had booked a ticket on 17th, I was ready to leave. And I got a call from Perumal saying that Nirmala Sitharaman has got sick and she could not attend. And I told him, leave it at that. Why don't you have somebody else inaugurate it? No, I got a special message from Nirmala that only she should release the book and nobody else should release the book. I don't know whether it was, I felt flattered or I felt disappointed. Maybe that she had some fireworks to give. But she came and, well, I think some of them are reported in the press, that's not very important. She spoke very appreciatively of the book. I was surprised. It was all about politicians, and I was expecting her to react very adversely, but she did not. In fact, she had read the book and she had quoted a lot of passages from the book. Then Gopal Srinivasan called me and said, why don't you have one function in Chennai? I was not sure whether anybody was interested. They just wanted to know my reaction. My expectations were nil. I didn't expect anything to do. Even when I wrote the book, I wrote it very reluctantly. But then last Tuesday, after this event was fixed up, I was having a meeting with Sesh when I had a great fall. I fell down from the chair and I broke my hand. I mean, it was swelling and I thought initially it was a fracture. He very asked me whether we would like the meeting to be deferred. No, there is a jinx to the meeting. Even with all this discomfort, I would go or attend the meeting. This morning, yesterday, when I went to the doctor, I told him it was on a sling. I was in a bandage. He said, no, if you are going for a function for release of your book, take away the sling and bear with your discomfort. I'm glad that a few days back you wanted to know what my expectations. My expectations were this book was, this is not an autobiography. You don't find my life history there. I don't know. I think it would be worse than what he has read out as a bibliography, my profile. It won't contain anything like that, where I was born, where I studied and all that. It is not even a book on history of banking. I did not write it as history, not even history of ICICI. It was intended as a book of anecdotes. And as Sarshai said that I was fond of telling stories. But all of them are authentic. And none of them invented. It was all authentic stories I used to narrate. What he said is true. In the boardroom as also in my lunchroom, people used to roar with laughter after I finished narration. One day I found he was referring to the bank board, even in our luncheon meetings, I used to keep on entertaining people with a lot of jokes. And one person was sitting there. He did not laugh. When I finished, I was a little disappointed. I turned to him and said, you heard this joke before? He said, no sir, I'm leaving the bank tomorrow. That can tell a lot about why people, but the board's appreciation of my jokes were really pleasant. It was a book of anecdotes. In the book of anecdotes, when Dr. Rangarajan very reputed. I attended his release function. I spoke at that time also. He told me, Mr. Vogul, you have written a book. You did not mention anything to me about that book. You should send me a copy. I told him on the phone. He spoke to me from Hyderabad. He said, this is not a book you should read. I don't know why. Because it's too flippant a book for a person like your eminence to read this book. Because it is not intended to be a profound book. It is not intended to be, there is no economic theories there. There are no developmental economics there. In fact, it is completely bereft of every of these things. Now, why do you want to read it? No, if it's a book written by you, I want to read it. Then I sent the book to the Madras School of Economics and they forwarded it to him at Hyderabad. A few days back, I received a very charming message from him. In fact, it's a very, very valuable message that shows the gap between my expectations and how the book is received. He said, Mr. Vogul, I really enjoyed the book from cover to cover. It doesn't take much time to read the book. It's because it's such a short book. It's just you can finish it. And he quoted something as initially. You can say the anecdotes itself by themselves would have made a very good book. But in addition to that, you add a narrative because the anecdotes themselves will give that's quoting his words, it gives a larger message. And your narrative is further elucidation of this thing. I was really flattered. I sent him a message. I really didn't expect this message from you, but I consider it as a very valuable one. These anecdotes were all real. This is not something which was fabricated or anything like that. Even though the last portion of the book, which Rangarajan appreciated, he made a special mention. The last episode he mentioned about the missing purse. He said it was too good to be true. I said I could not believe that it was true. Then what I did was, in that book, that portion itself, I had introduced an eyewitness. The eyewitness was my nephew. That is my wife's sister's son. And I introduced, initially I put his name and thing because people won't believe that story, I put it. But then on second thoughts, I did not mention any names, I cut it out. He happens to be the CEO of L&T now. And he will shortly become the chairman of L&T this September. So I wanted him to be an eyewitness because he was with me when this incident happened. And I told Dr. Rangarajan also said this, I know that it was humorous, you enjoyed it, but this really happened, this is the way of bureaucracy in our country. And well, as I told you, these narratives are all factual, but what is perhaps biased a little bit is my own spin on that. My spin on that is I chose the narratives with a particular object in mind, and the narration was heavily biased in favor of certain themes for which my brain has been programmed from early years. As I mentioned in Bombay, in my teens I was influenced by a person very famous here in Chennai, Rajagopalachari, known as Rajaji. I used to attend all his meetings, I used to read everything of his. That I was badly in my age of 17 when he became the first chief minister of Chennai. His name is again, after 50 years, has been revived in connection with that Sengol, which is available. Whether it is even it is true or not. I read about it even a long time back. It is not now. Whether what spin you give it is a different matter, but it happened. So when I was fascinated when Rajaji stood up on the floor of the assembly, and then against an opposition which was very illustrious opposition, consisting of Ramamurthy, Sundaramaya, T. Prakasam, and such eminent persons, he pointed his finger at him, which was very uncharacteristic of him. That's what the newspaper reported. I was not witnessing that even, that you are my enemy number one. And pointing out to the communists, they said that I will fight you from A to Z, because your ideology will not sell in this country. And I will oppose this ideology for all time to come. And he made such a passionate speech that made an impression on me. Even today I remember it. This is after about nearly 60 years, 70 years. It's after 70 years I still remember the speech, that violent expression. So that my mind was conditioned. I was all for free enterprise and all for private trade. And then I mentioned an example that immediately after that, there was a lot of price control in Chennai. there was rationing and rice was not sold in the market. He, as a chief minister, removed the price control. He allowed the free trade of sugar, trade of rice. And local, black market rice was being quoted at what, 7 or 8 times the ration price. And the price came crashing down. And Rafi Ahmed Kidwai was then the food minister. And Rafi Ahmed Kidwai apparently told that I told Rajaji not to discuss this with Jawaharlal Nehru because this is opposed to this ideology. During the 70 years, I came to believe very strongly in the fact that this country was taking a wrong turn all the time. It was going in the socialist path, in the communist path. I was, in fact, my feeling got strengthened when I attended an Asian Development Bank meeting when one Chinese, I forget his designation, his name is Hu, H-U, and he was chairman of a power company. He told a very beautiful story of the tale of the two prime ministers. The tale of the two prime ministers is that one prime minister was Singapore, another was India. Both of them had inherited a similar decolonization period from the government of from the imperialist power, Britain. One prime minister told that the Western capitalists, you please come to my country and establish your enterprises. You please come here, you are welcome. If you want to make profit, you make a profit. Leave something for us. That's what he said. Another prime minister said that I am tired of imperialism. We fought it for 300 years, and I personally fought it for 50, 60 years. And I don't want any imperialists in this country again. He fought against the foreign capitalism, and they did not allow them the foothold in this. So the difference between us is who won the war ultimately. Singapore's economy was in per capita income was $400. India was a little better at $450. Singapore bloomed to $25,000. India was not behind. When I was narrating the story, some of the bureaucrats told me, Bagul, don't be silly. Singapore is a city-state. You are a big nation. There has to be a difference between that. But I told him the principle is the same. So, Sesh, in order to answer to your question, one of the themes I picked up, and that runs through the first half of the book, is what damage the government can do to the state sector. In fact, that's why the only two incidents have been mentioned there which I did not personally witness. One was Chagla's victim against the LIC Mundra scam, in which he said that central should not interfere with the state institutions. Maybe LIC was nationalized for a good cause. Imperial Bank was nationalized to State Bank for a good cause, but the central should know how to govern these people. And so he commented very adversely against the then finance minister who was forced to resign. Then the finance secretary H.M. Patel was let off with a censure. And the managing director, as usual, he lost his job. Because the ministers don't do the job. Because Teti Krishnamacharya was reinstated immediately thereafter as industry minister. And only that, I remember I forget his name, he is a South Indian managing director of LIC. He had to lose his job. So this book you will read to. The second incident was with relation to State Bank of India. And it's not an incident, it was not something which I did not witness it, but I had to handle that. I don't know, there are a few State Bank people who came and introduced me. We used to have what you call a contributory pension scheme, and that contributory pension scheme was abolished in the case of workmen because of a Supreme Court decision. John Mathai was the chairman of the State Bank of India. He said it should abolish it for the offices also because the principle is the same, because it was introduced in 1930 recession time, and so the principle is the same that they should also abolish. Then government representative on the board said no, this cannot apply to the officers. The judgment pertains only to the workmen, and so you should confine it. John Mathai said no, the principle is the same, and in any case, you as a government cannot interfere with my internal management. My internal management is my business, it is not your business. And there was a discussion between, I went through the whole file because I had to prepare a note for abolishing the pension contribution for the officers. So I had to go through the whole thing, and there the government representative recorded a minute of dissent. Mathai said, you can go ahead and record a minute of dissent, but when he went back, he issued a directive to the State Bank of India in terms of under the statute that you should implement this. It's not only a government representative's decision, but it is the government order. John Mathai implemented it and resigned. And I said, he wrote a letter in which he said that you had assured me, Jawahar and Panditji, that you could not interfere with the internal management. And you interfered with it, I don't want to continue. So these two incidents apart, the rest of these anecdotes which are there, you mentioned about...
I said you pick a choice, but one of the anecdotes relating to Moraji Desai, Rajiv Gandhi, or Bansilal.
Moraji Desai, I would mention. Moraji Desai, I was a very young person. So I became director of the National Institute of Bank Management when I was about 38. And we had to have a chairman's conference. And I, as a chairman of the, CEO of the director of the National Institute of Bank Management, had to conduct this. So it was a very important meeting for me in Delhi, where about 28 public sector banks were there, and the State Bank of India chairman was there, Deputy Governor Reserve Bank of India was there. On my right was Finance Minister, on my left was the Prime Minister, Dr. Moraji Desai. And galaxy of political people were there, including George Fernandez and Ravindra Verma, quite a lot of people. And Moraji Desai made a very characteristic speech. It was immediately after the emergency in 1975. The meeting took place in 1977, a few days after their assumption of office. He said that you bankers, you are all cowards. During emergency, what were you doing? You were just, you were asked to bend, you crawled before the Prime Minister. You don't have backbones. In that vein, he went on talking about for a while. And then he also said, which I did not mention in the book, you might not have read, he told that it is my intention to have the nationalization remote, and I want to privatize all the banks. And that will be one of my first acts as far as the cabinet note is concerned. And then he went on in that same way. In fact, H.M. Patel was sitting next to me, turned to me, Mr. Bagul, kill the story, kill the story. Then I told him, I couldn't understand. He said, this story cannot come in the public tomorrow because this is not a cabinet decision. It is the Prime Minister's own decision. And the cabinet can never take a decision for privatize this nationalized bank. And I said, well, I don't know how to kill a story, sir, because I was 38. I was not very much involved in that. Then he looked at the puzzlement on my face and called somebody in the PTI or somebody, I don't know who, some press representative of the government of India. He whispered something to him. Next day, not a word of that news came in. We are talking today of the government controlling the media and saying that this government is controlling the media. And I was eyewitness in 1977 of how the government can control. Not a single newspaper published a report. I was an eyewitness. Then when Moraji finished his speech, Mr. Gatta, he happens to be the Canara Bank chairman. He was one of his illustrious predecessors. He was the chairman of the Indian Banks Association at the time. I asked him to stand up and give a vote of thanks. And he was a very tempestuous person, very intemperate person. He could not take the word of Moraji Desai. He said, sir, we heard what you said. Some of us did make mistakes, it's true that we crawled. But I want to ask you, under your government has this interference stopped? And in that vein he went on, that this is true of all the governments, your government also. You have been in office only for a few weeks, you are also interfering. Then Moraji Desai turned to me, and he was 78 or close to 80. I was 38. He turned to me, Mr. Chairman, I want to raise a point of order. I just did not know what to say. Prime Minister asking me to raise that he wants to raise a point of order. But he did not wait for an answer. That is very typical of him. He immediately said that I want you to tell me who is the person who is interfering with your banks. Who are all the people? I want you to name all these people. I want to name which are the persons who are interfering with this. Then Mr. Gatta then understood that he has overstretched himself. So very, sir, turned to him and said, I'll talk to you in private about this. Mr. Morales said, no, this is not fair. You made a public allegation against this government. So you have to tell me publicly who all interfered with this. I want the names of all these people. I won't stop unless you tell me these names of the people. Then next to me was the chairman of the State Bank of India, P.C. Nambiar, Krishnaswamy. They all urged him, Gatta, finish your speech. And then Gatta finished his speech. And then we all came down. Morales did not conclude his speech. I mean, in a sense, after Gatta gave his vote of thanks, we all stood up. But he went on speaking. And then I had to accompany him as the chairman to the... And he never used elevators, even at that age. He always used the stairs. He threw the security off guard because when he came to the meeting also, he decided to climb up that Ashoka Hotel was the meeting. It's a huge elevator, a huge number of steps. As he was coming down, I was the one who was going with him. He went on talking about his experiences in Surat, how he was a deputy collector in the Surat, how he stood up to the British. I don't know why you people are not standing up. Then we went down. And he would not stop. It was soliloquizing all the time because I could not say anything to the Prime Minister. I was just walking along with him. Then we went to the car. He said, thank God it was all over. And he was getting into the car when the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India at that time, the Governor had not taken office at the time, I.G. Patel, he pushed Gatta aside and said, go and apologize to him, And so Gatta was very reluctant, but then everybody pushing him, he went. And the door had not closed. He just bent and said, sir, I am very sorry if I had said something wrong. I want to apologize for my remarks. Immediately he got off from the car. He said, why are you apologizing? I made a public allegation against you, you made a public allegation against my government. We are all square. So what's the point? This is what I don't like. And then again he started a speech again. What I don't like is this fear complex that is pervading in this country. During emergency there was a fear. Even now there is a fear. And this fear is what I don't want. You should not fear nothing. Even if you offended me, you should be strong. You should not apologize. Then Gatta says, sir, okay, it's not apologize. One of the points was Gatta was to have been appointed as the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. At the time his name was recommended. He tried to go to Prime Minister. And so he was pushed for that. And he was appointed subsequently. But he did not accept it. He resigned. But he's a very different person. So as I said, my narration was around this state sector. And the whole theme of that first 50% was that. Second, of course, was very different. Maybe some point I'll come back to you. This. I told you about Rajaji's statement that you are my enemy number one. Now, when he says enemy number one, there has to be an enemy number two. And so who is the enemy number two? And everybody was wondering whom he is going to name as his enemy number two. He says, my enemy number two is the PWD, Public Works Department. And by Public Works Department, he meant that this was the symbol of corruption of those days. 1950s, I'm talking about, when PWD was the symbol of corruption. Later on, several symbols of corruption have emerged in the country. And this is not one. At that time, there was only one symbol of corruption, that people were making money through the public works. And then he said that so long as there is life in me, I'll fight this corruption. So that was again a very strong message for me, namely that value system which was then my mentor. I would say mentor because I always used to dream about him. I met him once or twice at his house. And he was living in Basdullah Road at that time, and I used to meet him for an entirely different reason. I was a schoolboy at that time, but I went and met him. I had a very distinctive feeling of inviting him for one of our functions. But then I had a bit of a chat with him. So he said, PWD is a corruption. He did not stay long enough in the office. But during my entire 20, 30 years in office as a party in public, I didn't see much of corruption around the State Bank time. It all started saying at Central Bank and Bank of India and in the CIC. It is not so much the banking corruption I witnessed. I did not witness banking corruption. It is the political corruption. Today it is a symbol of corruption If you want to say, if Rajaji is alive today, the public enemy number 10 will be the politicians would be the number 2. Because they really symbolize the corruption and the tremendous fall in value that had taken place over a period of time. In fact, towards the end of my book, I waxed eloquent on the corruption value, because I believe that that was the most important thing that's happening in the country today, which has to be checked. Mr. Perumal had given this book for editing, which is quite normal. The editors did not do anything for the first 6-7 chapters. They only came to the last chapter, and someone telephoned to me and said, "Oh, can you remove this chapter?" I said, "Why?" I said, "Because it's so much against the trend of the other chapters. The other chapters were amusing, anecdotes, that thing. Here you are suddenly moving into another dimension. You are talking about the value system in the country." Because I was very eager by the fact people keep on talking about the culture that was there, our longest civilization, which is true. Ours is the most ancient civilization, perhaps along with China. But China ceased to be an ancient civilization because China has chalked out an entirely new path. The present Chinese citizens do not know much about Confucius or Taoism or any of the Chinese philosophers. While we still inherited that old civilization, we still talk about Vedas and Upanishads and the various philosophies and other things that go along with that. But my anguish was, while we speak about cultural traditions on the one hand, we ignore the cultural traditions. What we have instead, accepted is some of the decadent cultural customs which are not really part of our cultural traditions. Our cultural traditions is not casteism. Our cultural traditions is not, religious divide or anything like that. Even 1920s, Vivekananda said, "I don't believe that Hindu religion is a tolerant religion." And then it was very shocking. Vivekananda, such a modern thinker, talking about Hindu religion is not a tolerant religion. He said the word tolerance is not true of Hinduism, because tolerism signifies that you are sitting at a pedestal and tolerating, looking down upon other religions. I will use the word Hinduism as a religion of acceptance. It accepts every faith because we believe in something which is true of everything. So that tradition we have forgotten completely. We are now worshipping. We are not talking in terms of casteism. Casteism some of the socially relevant customs at the time will be no longer socially relevant. That happens in my 3 generations where I have lived. I have seen sexual overtones taking a lot of turn. For example, what was considered as abhorrent at one particular point of time today has become acceptable. Those days, as youngsters, when you go to watch a movie, when the hero and heroine come close to kiss, the camera will move away and then show 2 flowers coming to them. That also thing used to happen. Today that is not the case. And today, you couldn't talk about homosexuality or lesbianism at that point of time. Today it is very different. Today, this generation had that living together without a marriage is again considered to be an acceptable one. So social values keep on changing. And so you don't hang on to the social values. You hang on to the true cultural traditions which are based on something which is very important, core values, which will elevate you into a higher plane. The elevation of the higher plane is also for a purpose. The purpose is from that elevation, you move into the next higher plane of achieving the purpose of your existence. That's the whole chain which was built up at that particular point of time. That was lost. But what we are hanging on to is the casteism and the religious divide. I will stop with that because I don't want to give a speech.
I'm disappointed that you didn't narrate this incident about your regional manager developing a new tool for credit assessment. That is something which you should not miss, but I want to tax you more on that.
What is that?
Delhi regional manager.
Oh yeah, Delhi regional manager. That is very interesting. In fact, Naushad Forbes also talked about, one borrower came to me for, at the time, I was just about to go for the meeting. All our decisions used to be taken in what is known as COD, Committee of Directors. We never used to take decisions on files. The proposal would be submitted to the Committee of Directors and we would discuss and then we would take a decision. On such occasion, this gentleman came and said that I want to meet. And I told my secretary, it's only 5 minutes, I have to go to the meeting. No, sir, I won't take more than 5 minutes. He took 10 minutes. He told that he had just come from Rajiv Gandhi and he is a non-resident Canadian citizen and he wants to do something for the country, and that is why he has submitted this proposal. And so in that vein, I went on talking about Rajiv Gandhi and the political system and all that. I took an instant dislike for him and said that I went to the meeting wanting that this proposal should be declined because I didn't like this person. But the proposal was so strong that it was strongly recommended by the team and by the managing director who was sitting next to me. Then I said that, do you inquire about this person? Yes, sir, we made inquiries, it's all very satisfactory, the promoters have told me. Then, at that time I had introduced a new system of having all the officers attend the COVID meeting, particularly the new entrants, because I wanted to give them a feel of how decisions are made at the top level. So there was a crowd, about 20 people. I was ashamed to go and tell this crowd that I don't want to approve this decision because I don't like this person. That seems to be a very odd thing for me to do. So I accepted the decision. We lost about $10 million in the deal. And it was a very sizable one. And the incident where finance minister tried to, on top of losing this money, he wanted to pressurize me to agree to something. The finance minister is still alive. So I did not mention his name, but it is easy to guess the name. Who is that person? And so I was narrating, at that point in time when an incident took place. I can mention the name, one Chaturvedi, I don't know if you remember, Flex Shoes. You remember that? I cheated everybody in the banking system. Not a single bank was spared. Everybody was spared. One bank was spared, CIC was spared. And so when I went to the regional office at Delhi, I complimented the team. How come you were not caught in the scam? I'm so much to compliment you. The regional manager happened to be a lady. She told me, sir, I am taking credit for this. So what happened? So when the gentleman came to see me, Chaturvedi came to see me, I looked at his shoes. He was wearing white shoes. My mother had told me not to trust a person with white shoes. At that time, the Hindi movies were all on the Hindi movies you would have seen, and that the villain was always wearing the white shoe. And so that's even for that reason you said, no, so this is all instinctive. So I was reminded of that, saying my instinct also told me that this is a person who cannot be trusted. But then, if you're interested in reading their book, you just said that particular incident was really a good incident, was a big green my mind, because that was one in which I told the finance minister, and fortunately the finance secretary was there. He told me, finance minister, you cannot question Mr. Bagul, Mr. Bagul's decision, you should go along with that. But he did not trust the finance secretary, asked the additional secretary to pursue the matter with me. And then I told the additional secretary, if you want to pursue this matter, I am ready to resign the whole thing. I am not going to give any further money to this fraudster. And this gentleman, if I want to take a leaf from that book, he defaulted, he became a defaulter. We could not recover any money because the security had disappeared. Then he stood for election. That's the beauty about it. Because he did not want to stop serving the country. Because, I mean, how can Mr. Bagul stop him from serving the country? So he stood for election. He stood for elections in Independent in South Bombay. I was so happy. He did not get many votes. Not only he lost the deposit, but he could not garner more than 1,000 votes at that particular point of time. These are some of the incidents. But one more incident I will then quote it and then which I did not put in the book. There was a Minister of State who told all the bank, he was not the bank chairman at the time, not in 78 you were not there, and he wanted all the bank chairmen to assemble for the loan matters. Those days loan matters will be hundreds and thousands of people would come, and bank will make a token distribution of this. Just like what is it? Employment forms are being 75,000 token. We used to handle. So we were asked to assemble a very large number of people. Each bank was given a quota. So you should bring 10,000 people. That's Delhi, the Ram Leela grounds. So we brought in, that gentleman is also alive now, Janardhan Pujari, and he asked me, I said, I don't want to come for this, because several chairmen attended, I did not want to attend. My regional manager attended. He took me to task. He took the banks to task for two reasons. We had a very good attendance, but we also created a huge traffic jam. And the police complained to Pujari. And Pujari called me. I was the chairman of the Indian Bank Association at the time. He said, Bagal, why did you people do all these things? Sir, it was under your instructions. My instructions was to bring people there, not to keep the lorries there and to take them back. So your idea is that lorries should not be parked there. This is how political meetings are being held. People will be transported to the ground. People will not be transported out of the ground. So why did you break the tradition and keep the lorries there? I'll stop with that.
Okay. Thank you. So that's a curtain raiser for what is in store on the book. Mr. Sridharan, you have a similar kind of a background. I'm sure that you have a whole host of anecdotes on this. So,
if
over
there
to
is, first of all, thank you very much for inviting my Mauli and my good friend Lakshmi. It's a great honor to be seated next to Mr. Vagal, who was our, when I joined State Bank of India as a probationary officer, he was chief officer personnel. And we were all, I was from IIT directly, no job, just straight from IIT. So we were all very cocky, our batch. And we found in him an equally cocky chief officer personnel. Because somebody asked him, why didn't Mr. X get promoted? I don't know how he came to, maybe his father's friend or something like that. Mr. Vagal replied, he was not good enough, that's it. So, we like this step of us. So I've known him, I've sort of this thing, but one of my regrets in my life is that I never had a chance to be working with him in any of his capacities. I've continued to be in State Bank. I had a chance actually. Mr. P.V. Maya, whom you appointed as the MD of the original ICICI Bank, and I had known Mr. Maya from State Bank days. So he asked me if I was interested. I used to be the international division of State Bank of India those days. And he asked me whether I would like to join ICICI, the new ICICI Bank. And of course, the security of State Bank is something, but we had been, we were harboring some sort of complex because we had got demoted because State Bank of India, adopted the IBA scales of pay from the earlier, State Bank. So we were all, the pay was the same, but we felt that our status had got demoted, all that type of thing. But I didn't join. To cut a long story short, I didn't join because I wanted to be the credit manager. And he said that it's already gone to somebody from ICICI, so you can't get it. So I said, I'm not interested. He said, you joined the foreign exchange because that's your background. I said, no, I'm not interested. So I lost a chance to work under you, sir. So, but the point I would like to make first and foremost, of course, and I won't take too long because we are here to hear Mr. Vagal, not to listen to me. But I feel, see, the way Mr. Vagal is to be described, if I may call him Vagal, sir, he is an intergenerational leader, spans different generations of bankers. In banking, unlike in normal life, a generation is 10 to 15 years. Because the half-life of a banker, if you take a radioactive term, is very small, usually linked to the period of his executive office. Once he retires from an executive office, then he's like an exponential curve. It drops very drastically. So Vagal is an exception. And not only he's a doyen of the industry, he's been called an institution builder. I would call him a phenomenon. The Vagal phenomenon is a phenomenon that has afflicted, if I may say so, our industry, banking and Indian industry. We're all thankful for that. But the bad news is that that phenomenon can never be repeated. It is irreplicable for two reasons. The first, as you have already, some of you have not known him, I've already heard him, is this quality of head and heart which Mr. Vagal sir has, is something that Normally, definitely not in the banking industry, you would find this type of intellect, with due respect to many banking stalwarts, some of whom I have had the good fortune of working. So you can associate them with economists, central bankers maybe, but not with commercial bankers, banking practitioners. So he, in that sense, is a sort of scholar banker, which is extremely rare, and therefore I feel there may not be one. The second is our system. The way our polity and our governance system, regulatory system is evolved. It is impossible for anyone to rise like Mr. Walker. Impossible. First of all, he has made transition from State Bank of India to from academia into public sector banks, from public sector bank and then join private sector itself is a very great thing. Normally, that transition happens only after you retire, but he did it well in his, in his prime years, and then develop this and develop the culture, and that is what is important, because in public sector banks, most of us had very short tenures. So some of us, like me, tried to do things in a hurry, but it usually is not a permanent one, because it just happens for some time. In my bank, Central Bank, I have no hesitation in saying it was one of the worst banks when I took over. In fact, I was sent, and many people commiserated with me, including some of my friends in RBI and all that. Why did you choose this bank? You are happily doing something in. But I said it's challenging, and so there was no direct recruitment in Central Bank of India for 25 years. So just 2-3 years after you left, maybe because of the unions, no direct recruitment. Central Bank. So for about 25 years, so we had a very huge staff, 35,000 or 36,000 people. 1/3 of them were actually subordinate staff promoted as officers, and many of them have become branch managers by a flex of time. And the unions had blocked all this, direct recruitment. All the unions of the banking industry had their origin in Central Bank of India. All the top leaders of the Indian banking industry are all from Central Bank. And even today, I think that is a position. Comrade, Chakravarti, so many of them. So, of course, they had, by the time I had joined, the power had gone down considerably. But in Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, who had become the finance minister then, they had a champion. Because Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, by nature, he was a little bit of a leftist, and he was quite indulgent to these people. I remember very vividly. So I had to do something dramatic to gain some and make some impact. The first thing I did was that there was a lot of silozation in public sector banks, particularly in HR and some departments. So we had an HR general manager, whom I called Peshwa because he was from Pune. So he was about to retire about 8-9 months back, and he was in the HR department for about 30 years. He represented the bank. No chairman before had the power to dislodge him. So to cut a long story short, I sent him on a week international seminar in Beijing. And then by the time he came back, I transferred him to general manager, internal audit, which was in a place far away from Nariman Pond, which was their headquarters. It was somewhere in Navi Bombay. So he was foaming at the mouth and all that. But although he was very angry, the whole bank was very happy. I had become a hero. So everybody was, the officers, staff, everybody was very happy. So when I called the unions to meet, we had all the unions with us. You take from MNS, of course, AIBA, which is AITUC, Communist. We had the Congress, we had Shiv Sena, we had MNS also, we had HMS, and of course CITU, which is CPM. 6-7 unions. I'm told that used to be a big affair, the annual meeting with the chairman or biannual meeting. So what I did this time, I said, I put the meeting at 6 o'clock in the evening. So I said, let's not waste customer time. We have got a lot of work to do. We'll meet at 6 o'clock and we'll work through the night. We'll listen. So when we had the meeting, I said, instead of my listening to you and all your demands, I will make a presentation. And then please, then we will discuss. We are here, food will be available, drink will be available, whatever you want to drink, you can have it. So I made a presentation to them, telling them what ails the bank and what are my measures. And one of them was recruitment of direct recruits and also campus recruitment. Wanted to take, because recruitment of probationary officers, training them to take a year. I want somebody very quickly in the bank, in particular in branches. So we said we'll take directly from the campus, from business schools. So, of course, to cut a long story short again, so that was accepted with some demur, and I actually threatened them that I'm already holding the job. I was also concurrently chairman of National Housing Bank. I'm working for running two institutions for one salary, because the government will not pay me two salaries. So I'm willing to go back. I don't want. If you want, so they agreed to that, and that started the revival of the bank. In the first 6 months, the profit that we made was more than the annual profit of central bank ever in its history. So that's the type of thing. So one point which, sir, coming back to your point, if you could have, I feel, because you are having a fund of anecdotes, some anecdotes about your interaction with the union would have been very nice, if I would say so. And I want to mention this in the context of E.K. Thakur, because in State Bank of India, he had a very key role, first as secretary to Mr. R.K. Talwar, and then as chief officer personnel. He had a key role in shaping the relationship between management and the union. And we had an officer called E.K. Thakur, who later became an MP and all that. And I had some good, his wife was my batchmate. We had a good relationship with him. And he used to speak later, he also became chairman of Saraswat Bank. He used to speak so warmly of Mr. Bagul, of his contribution to the shaping of that policy, and notwithstanding the fact that we had several agitations during that period. I myself have participated in some of those agitations and almost lost my job. So that is the way that one of the understated contributions of Bagul sir is this industry relations development, where there has been a sort of a symbiotic relationship. We understood each other, helped them where it needed, and they in fact supported us in critical decisions, including in my bank, the incident that I mentioned. The general secretary told me, as long as you are there, we won't do anything. But once you go, whatever some of the things that you are doing is against our principles. Particularly this campus recruitment is unconstitutional. Once you go, we will see. And they did it. Supreme Court struck down campus recruitment with PSUs. Even today, PSUs cannot do campus recruitment. So my friend who was chairman NTPC, he told me, because of you, then we have also lost campus recruitment. But we can take on contract basis, and which is what now the PSBs and all are doing. So I'll stop here, sir, and then...
I just want to come to your point. Central Bank of India did not have a direct recruitment because of policy with the union. But it is not true that people promoted from through written examination are not on merits. We had an agreement with the union saying a list of 100 questions should be prepared and sent to everybody. And questions will be asked only from that 100 questions. And then only out of that 100 questions we will ask only 10 questions. And if out of 10 questions you answer 4 questions broadly correctly, then you would be deemed to have passed. And those who have passed will be again ranked in order of seniority and then only promoted on that basis. So it is a very interesting agreement which you have. So don't decry. The people of that generation had a lot of
yeah, I think taking off from there, this is amusing to most of you who have not been through this generation where we all share one thing common, which is much of our professional career was during the license charge situation, very highly regulated kind of an environment. And if you look back, a lot of them certainly are very amusing, but it was tough working in those conditions. So I'm also slipping into an anecdote mode now. So I'm just going to give you 2 very brief anecdotes to say what are the kind of environment we were working in, and to raise a question to both of you based on that. One is where, when this was I think in 77 or 78, the Ashok Leyland manufactures, as you know, trucks and buses. In addition to that, we also manufacture engines, industrial engines for generator applications. In those days, we had a license to manufacture 1,530 industrial engines for genset application. In that particular year, there was a complicated formula. You could exceed that license capacity through a complicated formula, and you can go up to a certain number. So using that formula, we could go up to 1,590. But we ended up in that year producing 1,630, which is clearly violation of the license condition. And that was a time when there was acute power crisis, and people were waiting in queue for getting a genset. And we had the capacity, but we could not manufacture because our license was restricted to 1,530. And to top that, if you produce more than that, you had to go to the DGTD to explain why you exceeded the license capacity. So I made 3 trips. And I was being lectured by the Director General as to how we have contravened, and the fact that we have been irresponsible in not meeting the demand and so on. At the end of the day, it dragged on until March of that year, and Delhi was becoming hot. And then suddenly I got a call from this very venerable gentleman saying that can you come to Delhi? So we immediately went there, rushed there. And he said, don't do it again, this time I'm condoning. And then when I was leaving, he said, there is this particular private genset manufacturer who is based in South Delhi. So will you make an out-of-turn allocation to him? Because his house was in the south of Delhi. And it was getting to be summer, and therefore we got the condonation. The second incident related to getting an approval from Reserve Bank for paying a service engineer to be posted in a place called Zaire, which is now called the Democratic Republic of Congo. We sold some 200 vehicles, and we had to post a service engineer, and the Reserve Bank had to give the approval for the monthly allowance. We had sought $250, and the Reserve Bank would not budge, and they said only $200. So I made several trips, but they said no, because your competition has sold 200 vehicles in Upper Volta, and we paid only $200. And no matter that the Upper Volta was a different country, but they were stuck at $200. Until one meeting where I saw in this gentleman's office a book on Indian philosophy by Dr. Radhakrishnan. I never had until that time any interest in Indian philosophy, but I promptly brought that book and went through it. And then I appeared again a week later at his office, and I said that, this wonderful book that I saw, I've just gone through that, and I thought that I'll strike a rapport with him to get the $250. So when I said I read that book, he said rubbish. So I didn't know what to say. He said rubbish. So I said, no, the book is a very nice book. He said, no, it's a very badly written book. And I've got my father-in-law's book, which is a better version of this. And then he gave me his father-in-law's book. And then I promptly sent a message to him saying that I've read this and completely revised my opinion about Dr. Radhakrishnan's book. And we got this $250. So that was the kind of environment in which we functioned. So my question is, if you look back, you would think that there was so much of political interference, there was so much of regulatory excesses that we all went through. And you would think, this is not actually something which is only historical. Even today, you would say that so long as there is some kind of a role that the government has in terms of dispensing power in any manner, approvals of any sort, there is always a tendency to transact that power for commercial gains. And that is not going to go away. Whether it's a state government or some municipal corporation or central government, it's not going to go away. Yet in a highly regulated situation, and a market had not taken over from the government, and we did not have a market regulator to discipline the market, and in that situation, you would have thought that competence would not flourish. Yet you have these two extraordinary symbols of competence and strongly anchored on moral values succeeding in their professional life. Now, what is the secret of that formula that enabled competence and moral values to succeed even in that kind of a very toxic kind of an environment? What would you say would be the attributes of somebody who took it?
It all boils down to mentoring. And I told you that as a young boy, I was mentored by Rajaji's teachings and book. I used to attend every one of his lectures. He used to talk in the Lakshmipuram Young Men's Association. I mean, it's no longer young men, but it used to be known as the Lakshmipuram Young Men's Association, and he used to regale us. Later on, I was with Talwar. Talwar is a man, I mean, who shaped you. And I remember as a very young person, I joined him as his private secretary at the age of about 32, 33. He used to take me along with all his meetings with the ministers. So I once attended a meeting with the Minister of State. I remember his name, I don't know whether he's alive, Mr. Ganesh. He was very strong communist intonations. We had a problem with the unions, the communist unions, and Mr. Ganesh sent for him, and I went along with Talwar. So he told Talwar, he said, you should do what communist union wants. Talwar said, no, we have our own union and we have a problem, we won't do that. And in any case, that demand of that union is something which cannot accept. No, I am telling you to do it. Can you not do it? I said, if you tell me to do it, I won't do it. You mean to say you will disobey the government? No, I cannot disobey the government. If the government asks me to do it, I will do it. I am the minister, I am asking, no sir. The government should ask me to do that. Then Talwar, the Ganesh asked, so what do you want? You want it in writing? Yeah, I want it in writing. Not only in writing, but the government should give me a proper direction. The direction is contained in the State Bank of India Act. Namely, State Bank of India Act, you have to issue a direction to the State Bank of India for us to comply. If you do that, then I have no option but to comply. I will do that. Then he said, then in that case, you will see. Talwar told him, sir, but you read the section very carefully. The section says that the government can give a direction to the State Bank of India in public interest. You want to satisfy yourself that whether it is a public interest or not. And so you better go to the cabinet while preparing a note that this serves the public interest. And if it doesn't serve a public interest, you did not get it.
So it was possible for people to stand up and succeed, which is, yeah.
It's all mentoring. Even in today's very dispirited world, if one person stands up and says that I am standing up for this, I am sure that 1,000 others will follow.
Yeah, true.
And
Would you
I have
also
a slightly
agree?
different
Yeah.
take on this. First of all, it also depends on the person. Nobody will dare ask somebody like Wagul sir, even ask him, even at the time, not even today, even maybe 20 years. In my own case, I am nowhere as distinguished as he is. But I think developed a slightly prickly reputation. And I can honestly say, I served under two very powerful finance ministers, extremely powerful. And one of them, or probably both, or at least in the media, are accused of favoring this and that. I have not received one call from either of the two at any time for anything. I received some calls from, and I want to mention an anecdote here, from some of the MOS, this Minister of State for Banking is our direct boss. So we had to meet him. But normally they are completely ignorant of what is happening in the department because the finance minister doesn't give them anything, finance minister. So Mr. Scindia, Jyotiraj Scindia, he was Minister of State for Commerce under Kamal Nath, and he had complained to Dr. Manmohan Singh that I'm not getting any fights, I don't know what to do. So Manmohan Singh called a meeting of all ministers of state of all ministries, but not the cabinet ministers, to ascertain from them what is the fine. So my minister, who is incidentally an ex-IPS, very nice guy, additional DGP or DGP retired, he was also there. So I asked him, he had no work at all is absolutely, he would not let me go. I said, I've got other meetings, please let me go. Coffee pee lijiye, ye karo, wo karo and all. Then I asked him, what did you say about Mr. Pranab Mukherjee? I said, I'm so busy, he's giving me so much advice and so involving me in all meetings. Kaise main bolu ki mera paas koi kaam nahi hai. So when he used to ask me, kya ho raha hai, tum batao and all that. So this gentleman once, so he's a very decent chap, once called me on phone when I was in Bombay, saying that there is one college, education college, some college here of, I think an engineering college in Chennai, which you have to finance. Aapko to karna hi padega. Ye mere aadesh samjhiye, my instruction to you. So I said, I will check. So I immediately called up, because I was very unusual of him to say this. So I called up my general manager in Chennai, asked him what is it. He said, we have just received the proposal. It seems to be a prima facie, it seems to be, anyway, we had a screening committee and then it goes to the credit committee. So at the screening committee, I'm going to bring it, but I will ask, I said, have a deeper look. So, because by the time I left the phone, I got a call from this minister. I knew it is for this. So I said, sir, maine dekh liya hai, I've seen it. It seems to be a reasonably good proposal. We will process it fast, don't worry. No, don't give this loan. The fellow, another minister was sitting in front of me, so therefore I talked to you like this. Although he's a big chore, he used the word chore. He's a chore, you never touch. Incidentally, he's from Tamil Nadu, so I don't want to take his name. So he said that don't, even if it's a good proposal, I'll tell you, you reject it, because if he recommends anything, it cannot but be a jamla. That's what he said. There must be something wrong. So there are different types of people, but where I differ from Vabal sir is the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats, not so much the higher level bureaucrats. It is the joint secretary, because as we have distinguished civil servants here, joint secretary is our my bap. He is our God for us. For people like Vagal sir or Chairman State Bank of India, it may be the secretary or additional secretary. But for lesser mortals, JS decides. JS banking is the man who matters for us. And he can trip us in various ways, even if he doesn't. I had an excellent JS. He supported me. He was on my board in NHB and he supported me very strongly in major transformation exercise that I did. So I must, but the rumor was that he was very corrupt. So I don't want to say more, he'll be easily recognized. So anyway, but he used to give me a call, but always say, do whatever you feel like. I'll leave it to you. But always, there are several calls from him, but even if many of them I rejected, but I don't think he took it on me. So that was the thing. But there are other non-finance ministry bureaucrats. And here again one anecdote. In Bihar, the clerical job in a bank is a big thing, apart from, of course, the civil services. So we had, after many years, we had issued an ad for recruiting some 1,000 clerks, because we were very big in Bihar. So I got a call from a very senior and erudite minister whom I didn't know, but I have great regard by reading about him and all that in the press. So he said, there is one candidate whom I want you to select, come what may. I told him, sir, it's an exam which is being done by another institution called IBPS. I have no control. Once he passes that and comes, we will see the interview. You have to do it, Mr. Sridhar, you please understand. My body is under him every morning because he is the son of the masses. The fellow who does his massage. Mm-hmm. So that fellow's son is appearing. For me, it is very important that he gets a clerical job. So somehow you have to fix it. So I said, you send me this, but I didn't want to say he's a very senior minister, cabinet minister, and also a very powerful minister. So I didn't say anything, but naturally I didn't do anything with it. I just left it. I don't know whether he got selected or not to this date. Since he didn't call me back, I mean, of course, they will never thank, so they never call back when something work is done. So they didn't call back to say, I presume that, he must have got through, I don't know. I'll just stop.
Thank you. I think it's time now to throw this open to questions from the floor. But before I do that, I want to, again, we are all slipping into anecdotes, and probably that's because we are all aging. I'll just mention one very interesting conversation that I had with a minister. So he asked me, he said, sir, do you get a bonus? So I said, yes. I was a little baffled as to why he was interested in my salary. And I said, yeah, I do get a bonus. He said, who pays that bonus? So I said, well, the board of directors decide. He said, so do the directors pay you the bonus? I said, yes. Do they actually sign the check and do they give the cash from their pocket? I said, no, that's not what they do. It is from the company. So he said, there you are. When you people do something well, good, you get a bonus from the company. And if we politicians do something good for the people, why can't we take some bonus, and why do you call that corruption? So that I thought was an interesting angle to it. So let me stop there and throw this open to for questions from the floor. We have another 10 minutes.
So the question is to you, or to make you recall another anecdote. You said around sometime in the early 2000s, when the banking sector was going through stressed assets, that the banker is like a street dog who's barking at a car that is passing by him, and he will never be able to catch the defaulting corporate. I mean, I may be paraphrasing it, but effectively this is something that you said. Now with NCLT and with the change that has happened, have things changed for the better, and is there something that gladdens your heart that things have improved?
Yeah, to be very frank, ICICI was very much obliged to ICICI Bank for taking it. Because the ICICI Bank, as I mentioned in the book, you go through it, we had a lot of problems. But when we really converted ourselves into a bank, we learned a lot of lessons. And development banking has certain inherent problems, which a commercial bank does not have. You can manage commercial banks very sensibly. Many of you do not know that State Bank of India, which was the successor to Imperial Bank of India, used to have what is known as contingency reserve. This contingency reserve is a very interesting reserve. They were allowed by the legislation not to disclose their true profits. And they were told that they can tuck away a lot of the profits for a rainy day. And so by the time I came to the central office and I had to deal with that, I was staggered at the amount of profits which had been accumulated over a period of time. We had a problem and plenty. In Bank of India, when I was staring at a huge bank, bad loans that were there, I asked the general manager the first year of the closing, my God, with these bad loans, how are you going to declare a profit? No, sir, the government has said that we should show a 10% increase in profits. Yeah, but will the auditor accept this provision? No, government will instruct the auditor properly. So you don't need to bother. Already, the auditor was told that every bank must disclose 10% more profit than the last year. So there was a way of difference between the way in which State Bank of India was being managed and the State Bank of India is managed. So that is not much of a problem.
Also, I think in the last few decades, it must be conceded that the regulatory framework has certainly improved. The market forces have become very much more relevant, because any bank which is listed is bound by the discipline of the market disclosures, and therefore there is a much greater degree of discipline that has come into the banking industry. And it's not by accident that we have today an NPA which is about 5%, which is very good in the current context. And the provisioning is about over 70%. We have a capital, risk-weighted capital ratio of nearly 16%, which is significantly higher than the 9% mandatory requirement. So we are in pretty good shape. And that's not by accident. I think this is the result of, I would say, at least 2 to 3 decades of steady progress in going to the market. I think it started with, of course, the 91 reforms, but followed by the regulatory oversight getting to be far more relevant and far more disciplined, and market forces operating in a way that provides the guardrails for any kind of a bank to function. So yes, we're in pretty good shape. Any other questions?
Good evening, sir. Thanks a lot for the insights, and we are taking a lot of learnings from this session. One thing is, you were saying about license Raj, when you're mentioning, and the tough times you had to face as a chairman and as a leader of the bank. But now we are seeing a new trend. In this trend, now we saw one demonetization, and now another thing of taking away 2,000 rupee notes now. But is it the way of controlling in public than what you had seen controlling in private boardrooms? But is this the trend to control corruption, or what is your view on this?
No, in fact, I don't know that I understood your question. Search is correct. Banks are not being controlled now. Banks are being regulated. And the regulation is so fine-tuned. The result, it's more of a self-governing process. Banks have learned a lot of lesson Yeah, there are a few cases in which the Reserve Bank steps in and says that you should do it, you should do that. Because as a regulator, they have always been used to that. But today, banks are in a mode that they have to do the right thing. And they are under pressure to do the right thing. Not pressure from the government, not pressure from the Reserve Bank of India, but pressure from the market forces. That reinforces what I have been saying in the first few chapters of the book. It's ultimately the market becomes a much better regulator. Everybody is scared at the quarter end because they want to know what the various people who are following your balance sheet, their expectations on the market become a much greater pressure for the chairman of the bank than the power coming from the power. Things have changed.
I think the question is slightly different, if I may say. I think the question is, do we see the regulator being independent, or is there an underpinning of some kind of pressure from the government for the regulator to act? If I understand you, that's the undertone of your question.
As a route or taking away the money, or is it a way of reducing the corruption?
Well,
No, I will answer that.
Yeah.
There, in my 40 years of experience in the commercial banking, I have not come across a single instance where the Reserve Bank of India can be accused of. Government I have seen. I have not seen any pressure from the Reserve Bank of India, you should do this, you should do that. Government's interference with the Reserve Bank of India is limited to the economic policy. The whole recurring theme has been when Reserve Bank of India wants to fight the inflation, which is their mandate. They want to raise the interest rates. The finance minister wants the interest rates to be lower. This is the general feeling that has been taking place. In fact, Reserve Bank of India, in this very forum itself, I mentioned this quote. Narasimham was the corporate secretary in the Reserve Bank of India. There is a letter talking of 1950s, 1960s. Letter came from Bank of International Settlements, wanting to know the degree of autonomy enjoyed by the Reserve Bank, Central Bank of the various countries, 100 and odd countries. So everybody drafted a reply. Narasimham was the person who was asked to draft a reply by H.V.R. Iyengar, who was then the Governor of Reserve Bank of India. Narasimham was a very good draftsman. I mean, his drafting, I was working with him as a chairman of the Banking Commission. Beautiful language, beautiful thing, and a very flowering way he said how Reserve Bank of India was completely independent. Now the government cannot interfere with whatever you are doing. So Mr. Iyengar went through that. This is from the words of Narasimham himself. He narrated to me. He went through that. Narasimham was so marvelous, superb. I have never seen a draft like this. So I must compliment you on this. Sir, shall I send it? And of course you should send it. Then as he was passing through the door, Mr. H.V.R. Iyengar told, Narasimham, to be on the safe side, why don't you send it to the finance secretary and get it approved? So if the government really controls the Reserve Bank of India, it is in these matters. I don't think the government would take the trouble of telling Reserve Bank of India to instruct a commercial bank to do this or anything like that. Reserve Bank of India today, I would still hold it in very high esteem. Whatever you may say that there are always, you can accuse Reserve Bank of India of delays. You can accuse Reserve Bank of India of bureaucracy. But you can never accuse the Reserve Bank of India of dishonesty. And they are very strong in respect of this matter. In fact, having belonged to the banking sector for nearly 40-50 years, I am proud of the central banking institution which we have. I am sure that every institution...
Yeah. Any other question? Yeah.
So thank you for taking my question. Thank you for your time today as well. I wanted to follow up on the question that, actually I had a different question, but after hearing that, I will follow up if you could take two from me, please. The first question is, you spoke about one bank has a secret slush fund to inflate its profits that are off the book. Another bank is in cahoots with the auditor to engineer the profit figure. The first question is very simple. If you look at the financials of a public sector bank, can we trust the numbers that are disclosed? Can we trust the NPA is the NPA? I've seen newspaper ads by senior banking officials saying our bank is strong, we're done with the NPAs, we've made official releases on the exchange, and then RBI says we've issued a new program where we're re-examining bank assets and we've undisclosed X crores of loan of NPAs or whatever. And this happens year after, every 2 years RBI does this sweep and they find more bad loans in bank books that banking chairmen swear never existed. So the first question is, can we trust the numbers that public sector banks disclose? And my second question is to do with RBI independence. My understanding is RBI does not have the authority to force a merger or change the bank chairman or change any members of the board of directors of a public sector bank. It can't dismiss anyone in a public sector bank. So it has no authority over any public sector bank in reality. And if that's the case, is it really a regulator of the public sector bank? Or let's say, for example, it wants to force the bank to disclose NPAs. Does it have to, behind the door, get the finance ministry's approval? Because truly, public sector bank only responds to the finance ministry. It doesn't have to, it can openly disobey an RBI, a direct RBI order, and the RBI can't dismiss the chairman.
To the best of my knowledge, I can assure you that no bank can afford to disclose wrong figures now. The Reserve Bank of India control regulation is so absolute that if there is a single instance of deviation from the norms which have been laid down by the Reserve Bank of India, and they detect the slightest variation in numbers, even the small numbers, Reserve Bank will come down heavily on that. I mean, if you read the newspapers carefully, from time to time, the Reserve Bank of India lays fines. Recently, I had one instance where a particular chairman, for a very innocent mistake which resulted in some differences of opinion of the Reserve Bank of India, was scared whether he would continue get an extension. It is true of a private sector and public sector bank. Let me assure you one thing, even though I have quit banking industry 20 years back, today you can be very proud of the banking system which we have. And I can say, size-wise we may be a pygmy compared to the Western banks, which runs into billions and trillions of dollars. But in technology, we are way, way ahead of the Western banks. And even my children and grandchildren come here, and she wanted to make a payment, and said, will they accept $1 or something like that? What do you say? You pay with the digital payment. No, I want to make a small purchase only. Don't bother. Even if it is if you buy onions or anything like that, you can make a payment today in India. Technologically, I think you can sit there, don't need to go to a bank. No customer goes to a bank now. You go to any bank, it is empty. We are very proud of the banking system, and today the honesty in the banking figures. I'm not talking about the honesty of the banks. Banks can make a mistake. No auditor can say, auditors lose their job now. I mean, those days when I talked about Bank of India in 1980s, an auditor can listen to the Reserve Bank of India and say, okay, you give 10% increase in profits. These days are all gone today. We are living in a different zabana, different world, where the degree of honesty in respect to these things is very high.
So one small
Yeah, I
question.
think one last question. Okay, it's already.
I just want to answer.
Will dollar
Supplement.
will dollar go away as an international currency soon?
Yeah, that's a long answer, I'm sure. So please bear after Mr.
Yeah, I just want to respond to a young gentleman's thing. You see, what you're saying is anecdotal, because there's a lot of such loose statements being made. Might have been true 12, 13 years back, 10, 15 years. And the reason is, those days in project finance, RBI gave a lot of forbearances. Projects under implementation, they were being given how to treat them as non-performing asset and things like that. And then if somebody went to legal thing, there was some expert committee appointed to give some norms. There were several such dodges which were there, which an intelligent bank CEO or the CFO can use it to his advantage. And this was the problem. All that has got rationalized. And also the degree of control, as Bagal sir was saying, over the auditors has increased dramatically. The RBI has meetings, even in my time, the auditor, this lead auditor, first of all, there are 5, 6 auditors, not just one auditor. So there are lots of these things. So you can't deal with one person. So lead auditor was called and said that you will be blacklisted if something is wrong. And the problem was that in our bank, in central bank, our CBS, our core banking solution, was not implemented. And TCS was our thing. And I had called Ram and all that to discuss. So they put a lot of things because we didn't do what we are supposed to do, takes 2 hands to clap. So I had given a solemn commitment that I will get it done in 1 year, and it happened. So RBI was justifiably worried about the integrity of the figures. And I remember the auditor, I requested him, I've just come just few months back, give me more time. He said, no, I would lose my job. You go and sort it out if you can do it. So frankly, I put in an informal word with the deputy governor, who was a former colleague, so it helped, and so that give 1 year time. So that is the type of thing. Secondly, what has happened is that now RBI is able to, because of the shifting to XBRL format, RBI is able to get the data on a more or less on a real-time basis for the banking industry. It's happened over the last decade. So it is very difficult to fudge now, and there's a lot of audit trail that is happening. And particularly the asset quality review, which Dr. Rajan had initiated during his time, that has cleaned up, because there was a degree of evergreening being done, frankly, by some banks. But that is now completely stopped. It's impossible. And you have to disclose if there's a discrepancy between the RBI inspection report when they come and they check. And if there is a discrepancy of more than 5%, that has to be disclosed in the annual report. And then the market punishes you, as Babal sir was saying. So there are now a lot of checks and balances. It's very difficult now to fudge.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is that after such resounding assurances that you have heard from the stalwarts of the banking, you don't find some bank going belly up next week. So I'm hoping, keeping my fingers crossed, because there can never be 100% assurance. You are reducing significantly the risks of failure, but nobody can give a guarantee against failure or against any kind of frauds to happen. So. On that very positive note, I think we bring this to a close. I actually told Mr. Bagul that we should wind up by 7 o'clock because I didn't want to tax him beyond a point. But I know that there's so much of interest that the audience has to listen to him. It'll go on, so you'll have to excuse us.
Well, we have a metric over here of audience participation. And I can tell you, when it hits 7:10, 7:15, we have people fidgeting and walking out. And today, people are all spellbound sitting. And that shows the quality of the conversation which is going on here. And I'm sure all of you would like to continue this conversation, but in the interest of time, I think this has to come to an end. And thank you very much to our three panelists. They've kept us engrossed, they've kept us enthralled, and I'm sure we'll have more occasions to talk to them in greater detail in the times to come. My thanks on behalf of CIC to our chief guest, Shri Vagul, Mr. Sridhar, and Mr. Seshasai for conducting this entire program so seamlessly and with great finesse. Thank you very much. Just some announcements about the next few programs. We are going to have another program next week, and this would be on alternative development strategies for India. This is a panel of eminent development economists who would be speaking to us on this topic. After which we have two completely different programs. One on 3D printing and construction, which is a technology-based program. And lastly, we have a missile woman, a scientist who's going to talk to us. She has just retired from the DRDO and she was in charge of the missile program. So we're going to have a plethora of speakers here at CIC, and I hope we have the same level of attendance in the programs to come too. So thank you very much to all of you for having turned up, and thanks to our panel once again.